Hello everybody, we are back in Indiana, in Fort Wayne, with my very good friend, Mr. Mike Arango. How are you?
Great, good seeing you again.
It's a lot of fun. Now, I'm sure you've heard me say this many, many times. Mike was my engineer, it's 18 years ago now?
In 18 years.
Jesus, Mary and Joseph. Yeah, when I was 21. So this is the Cellar Door, isn't it?
Cellar Door Recording Company.
Yes.
What's been dubbed.
And he has a drummerizer, a percussionist, a drummist in there. And we are going to do a video, or more importantly, you're going to do a video showing how you record drums here. Plus, we will record the drums so you can download them and hear for yourself. He's going to thoroughly go through his miking techniques and how he's recording it. Stay tuned for Mike Arango's drum recording course for free here on YouTube.
All right, so Warren and I were talking a little bit about how I make this room that's not a huge room. It's not tiny, but it's not a huge room. How I make a smaller room sound bigger. So we have a pretty simple kit set up. We have kick and snare, hat, and a crash ride for Brant to play on out there. And then we have some of my room mics set up, and I'll explain how I make the room sound a little bit bigger. Usually works out, every drum kit's different, every drummer's different. Every time you go to mic up a kit, there's problem solving. You want to make sure everything's phase coherent, and obviously you want to get the tones right. But the most important thing is the performance by the drummer. So first thing we're gonna do is let Brant set up in there. He'll take his time and actually get everything set up, and then I'll get in there and place mics in kind of the rough location that I think they're gonna end up being in. Then we'll go from there. We'll end up moving things around. This, of course, is not much of a challenge because we only have 2 drums and 2 cymbals, basically, but usually you're trying to cram stuff in around 2, 3 toms. You're trying to have multiple cymbals. Sometimes the crashes are real low. Sometimes you have plenty of room and you can just get in there and just put stuff where it needs to go, but sometimes it's kind of a trade-off. And you can ask sometimes the drummer to move stuff a little bit, being able to get your mics where they need to go, but sometimes you're just forced to go on the fly and try to find something that'll work. Again, this one's gonna be pretty simple, so we won't have any issue placing the microphones or anything like that. Brant plays in a band called March on Comrade. It's one of the bands he plays in. I'm working on an EP with them. So he brought in a bunch of snares. I have a bunch of snares. The snare can really make the song, the right snare. And he had a handful of 8-inch snares, 8-inch deep snares, which are reasonably deep for a snare. And he puts this one up that just sounds huge, just and I'm like, is that one of the 8-inch snares? He's like, no, it's my acrolite. I'm saying, I have an acrolite over there. Can you go tune it like that? I've never heard mine sound quite like that. So after we get this all set up, we'll get our basic drum set up and everything with this handful of drums. We'll make sure everything is as phase coherent as it can be with room microphones. And then from there, we'll do a little experimentation. Do what we might do before a track and say, I think a deeper snare would benefit that, or maybe we do want a real high-pitched cracking snare. We have a handful of dampening tools out there, regular big fat snare drum and their quesadillas and that stuff. We have obviously the moon gels and the usual dampening kind of stuff, and we'll play around with that and just see how many sounds we can get out of one drum. And then there's a couple things that I might try. It seems like you always think of this stuff when you're going to mic up drums and don't have the time to do it, but miking up the shell of the snare, or using a shotgun mic. I think I have one of those, or you doing the stereo snare bottom, these kind of things that sound like really cool ideas until you don't have the time to implement them during a session. So we'll get our simple kit sound together, and then we'll mess around with the snare and see where we end up. So we'll start off with the kick. We have the inside kick in there already. That's the D12 VR, the current model, the D12 from AKG. I love that thing. I talked about it in the other video that we did. It sounds huge. There's a couple of DSP EQ curves that are in there that I should try, but I just never do. It just sounds great as just the dynamic microphone. This thing is the United Studio Technologies UT47 FET. It's the closest thing, aside from the Neumann recreation, the closest thing to a U47 FET that I've found, and it does that pillowy kind of thing that I like, and just kind of reinforces the kick, and hopefully we get what we're looking for out of that when we go to actually get the tones together. All right, and so we talked about, the most important thing is the performance. I'll let the drummer get set up, and then I'll come in and place microphones, and this is obviously no challenge when you have 2, 3 toms, a bunch of cymbals, all that kind of stuff, especially drummers who have their cymbals set up real low. It can be a challenge, but in this case, we're gonna get to place them pretty much wherever we want, which will allow with the messing around with snare miking techniques that we're gonna do later. I don't think we had to do a whole lot of moving around. I have to ask you to move anything when we did the other session?
Really at all. There might have been like a cymbal that bonked into a mic once or twice, but you caught it super fast. And
And that's, so you got to listen to that, right? Because yeah, the crash, I think the back of the crash was tapping the back of something. I don't remember what mic it was. But actually, it might have been the snare mic because of how we had to sneak it into the kit. But yeah, so in this case, I mean, this is nothing. We place the mic wherever we want. We're going to, part of this, the point of what we're doing here is going to be to experiment with mic placement. I plan to experiment a little bit with it and get it down on the snare where you see some people place it extremely close, and of course you get a lot of body. You also get exaggerated ringing and that kind of stuff when you're down there. I've been placing it higher like this quite a bit. The trade-off, of course, is you end up with more hi-hat. You can end up with more crash and that kind of stuff, but it really lets the snare breathe. So I end up with it there. And I think we'll also just experiment with what the mic sounds like when it's across versus like this versus like down on the edge. We'll mess around with that stuff later after we get our general snare sound together. So we're going to place this all just about where we think it's going to go. I'm usually putting my bottom snare about the same distance from the bottom as the top snare is, of course. And then I'm trying to stay away from the actual snares usually. This is just coming up towards the edge, so it's still getting the bottom of the snare. And there's no rules. It might sound absolutely wonderful or absolutely terrible right under the wires, but that's where we're going to start with it. I'd kind of like to get it about the same spot as where the top mic is pointed, but it oftentimes doesn't matter as long as it's phase coherent. The hat microphone, I always kind of just get this in the ballpark, and I don't know if I had you move this at all during the session, but that's usually a pretty important thing to pay attention to and to try to make sure it's pointed in the ballpark of where you're sticking. Usually, I mean, again, no rules, but I'm usually asking, where do you actually hit?
Usually about.
Are you over there? Okay. Yeah. So what I might do in this case is come in here and just see what that ends up sounding like if I'm pointed where you're sticking, but that also, it'll take me a little bit off axis from the snare, but the cool thing is the hat can sometimes block the snare from this microphone. So we'll put it there and we'll see what we end up with. I usually end up coming in more from this side, but
yeah, I seem to remember it being over here last time, but I was walking in with my big old 16-inch hi-hats, monstrosities over there.
Yeah, different hats, and yeah, they definitely sound different from these and from the 14s. I mean, 15s are pretty popular right now too.
Time, yeah.
So the overheads, what I'm doing, and this is nothing revolutionary, but I'm usually paying a lot of attention to where the middle of the kit is if you think of how you want to hear it, right? So we have the kick and the snare somewhere down the middle. It's never going to be perfect. And then you have your ride usually off to the side. You might have a crash further out. He just has a crash ride to mess with here today. You'll have a hat, maybe a crash a little further out, and get those a little more separation under the microphones. But that's how we'll try to split that. So what I'll do is I'll grab a cable, and that's, people will use a few drumsticks, people will use cables, people will use measuring tapes, and there's no guarantee that they're going to be phase coherent with the snare, but it's a good starting point to have them the same distance away from the snare, of course. And when we're doing our whatever snare samples or one shots, it doesn't really matter. I could line them up if I need to, but why don't we try to get it right? So we'll start there. The last kit we recorded, of course, the last drum session was yours. So we had the tom and the rack and a couple of crashes. And if you just try to set up around the kick and the snare and that kind of line down the middle and have them be the same distance apart, you'll end up with this mic way out here usually, which is not going to work. So that's why that one's a little bit higher than the other one right now. But at this point, it's just such a simple kit. We will mess with it this way and see how close we can get it.
I never really thought about that, honestly, because I usually think of it in the same way with this line as the center line rather than just straight up the middle like that. But the idea of the floor, we're not locked to the floor here. It's just got to be equidistant. So
yeah, and with height. Like with room mics, especially in this, we'll get to the room mics here, but I mean, even though I can kind of place them behind these gobos and get a little bit more of the room, there's a short section of the room over here, there's a longer section over here, you will end up with some asymmetry of the kick and the snare, but it just really, and even in the overheads, I mean, you bring up your close microphones and it's not that big of a deal, but it just bugs me, to have when I'm listening to the overheads and have it go kick, snare, so I try to bring it down the middle, but it's never perfect, but then you bring up the hi-hat and the snares in that mic and it brings it over a little bit over here, and I just won't even get started on that. So,
there's so many moving parts with drums. It's like, everything wiggles and wobbles a little bit.
Yep. And that was actually, it's one of the things, I mean, I was lucky enough, when I was starting out with a lot of this professionally, I was working with Warren, and the advice on you treat it as one instrument.
Yeah.
And it takes a while to really get that through your head and really do that. You want more control over the instrument than you have, but aside from like on that one track, we're like, okay, we're not using toms here. We're taking those out before we do this. You get rid of those things just ringing away. And just treating it as one instrument and not fighting the bleed that you get, because that's a lot of the personality of the kit. And then these room mics are going to pick everything up, but that's where we get some more of the length of the snare. And these cool things you can get sometimes in certain rooms with certain drummers and certain kits. You can get this real big, cool, boomy kick that just comes out of the corner. I have this little mic we'll get to. That's that Niant microphone that everybody was interested in last time we did a video here. That's the $15 mic that we have since discovered after everybody Googled it that it's been discontinued. But that's some little electric condenser microphone that's built into a Canon connector for an XLR, and I love blowing that thing up, in the corner of the room, and it sounds great on most stuff. And then of course cymbals get into it, and you just try to make it work.
Yeah, well, and I love the whole notion of this concept. I would listen to drum recordings for years and go like, what is that sound, and why can I never pick it up with my mics? And so much of a good drum recording I've long contended is the room. Like you're capturing the room. Same thing with like if you ever close mic a violin, it sounds gross. At least to my ears, it sounds really dry. And part of a good acoustic instrument in general, whether it's the drums or an acoustic guitar or cello, has to do with the space that it's recorded in. So
yeah, we could talk about that all day. But yeah, I remember for the first time I mic'd up an acoustic guitar, and you don't think about the room and just letting the instrument breathe. So I think I've learned a little bit more about that over the years. All right, so if you don't mind, just put your thumb on that thing down the middle. Right about there. Let's see where we're going to start. Actually, let's do it so it's pointed up the center of the thing, so we're not messing up our measurement. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but it just seems like something I want to get as close to perfect from the get-go as possible. And so, obviously, we're totally off on that one. So I think what we'll do in this case is just bring this guy down a little bit, because we don't have the crash hanging out high like we did last time, or when these were first set up. What was that, about 5 inches maybe, you think?
right about, yeah.
I might end up bringing it down to about the same height, which again is kind of unusual because of where you usually end up with the crashes. And for this kit, just because you don't have the crashes and stuff, I'm almost tempted to, oh yeah, we're not anywhere near over the hat, are we? Try this again. All right, so that a little off the back of the hat. I've also found that, this wouldn't be a rule either, but like sometimes when you're looking right down at a cymbal, you get the kind of warbly kind of thing, right? But you can get that off the sides too. But that's why I'm usually aiming a little bit off the side of the hat and the side of the cymbals. And sometimes I'll angle them in towards the snare a little bit. I guess it wouldn't be the worst thing in this case, but I do like the wider spread of it as well. So, all right, let's see where we're starting with this thing. Hold tight there. There we go. All right, so I will take that out a little bit, probably. Maybe up. This is the thing, though. You occasionally have somebody who comes in and they say, okay, well, we're ready to record. Or, all right, so how long does it take? The drum's going to be ready when I get there? Or will it take 5 minutes to set them up or whatever? And it's a couple hours, usually. I don't think it'll take that long, obviously, with this number of drums. But when you start to dial in the phase relationship for toms with the overhead and the rooms, and also having to make it work with the snare and the kick, and I'll usually have a microphone in here that also has to be reasonably phase coherent, at least somewhat constructive with the other stuff. All right, so still not quite, but that'll be good enough. We'll start there. We might end up moving them around a little bit anyway. So this is my mono room mic. So one of the challenges about a room like this, I kept it pretty dead. The room's pretty dead overall because I wanted to be able to get, first off, I like big, dead sounding close mics. I like that kind of chunk that you get out of them, but also it's a small room, so I didn't want to be forced as to how things would sound. But then, of course, I want to make the room sound bigger than it is. So this is that U47 recreation from Signal Arts. He built a great mic and just put it down in here, and decided one day I'm going to put these gobos like this and try to catch stuff in there bouncing around, and it actually does a pretty good job. It sounds good on the kick, and it sounds good on the snare. Same challenge with any other microphone, especially if you're going to crush it a bit. You have the cymbals that get into it and everything. This one we may end up experimenting with and moving around a little bit because it needs to be constructive with the kick and the snare and reinforce those. The microphones that are on the back of the gobos, this is just an attempt to block direct sound as much as possible. So those are a couple of AEA 84s, R84s. I've had them up higher. We did a session not too long ago, and this is the soft side of the gobo there. So I mean, it's not picking up a whole lot of reflections from back there, but it's not picking up as much direct sound, obviously, as if it was just open. And then the ribbons are rejected as much as they can from the side, you know. So the figure of 8 pattern won't pick a whole lot from the side. So that's the room microphones. And then every session I do, I will put a mic somewhere that I haven't before. So I've stuck a microphone in that cube seat down there. That didn't work very well. I've stuck them for the session you guys did. We had one back on the wall over there, and it's cool. It'll be usable on some stuff. For today, we're going to put one up in this corner back here, and we'll just see how it sounds. It's one of those, was it Audio-Technica 5040, I think. So at one point for my rooms, I've been putting R121s up in the corners just to try to get the low end that propagates and builds up there. And that worked okay. I had to use a ton of EQ to exaggerate it, and it worked all right, but it wasn't exactly what I was looking for, and it was just off balance more than this is. So I kind of ditched that, but putting that one up in the corner could be cool. We'll see how it sounds, and it may totally sound terrible, but, but it'll be another room microphone. So those are the microphones. So we'll go in there and start hitting drums and torturing you as you hit the kick a bunch and the snare a bunch, check phase and make sure everything's sounding good and is constructive, and then let you play a little bit, and then we'll mess with the snare and dampening and all that kind of stuff. Have some fun. So I'm working on the same console, so I will label my record tracks as red, my monitoring tracks as black, so I don't confuse them ever. All the recording ones are in solo safe, so when he's playing, normally we're tracking and I'm saying, man, what's that weird noise I hear, and I can solo the kick or the snare or the bass or whatever. I can do that without it, and it'll mute everything over here that's not solo safed. So that's one of the features on many boards, of course, but that's how you can use the console for both applications. Sounds pretty good out of the gate. That's just our inside kick, and I'll usually go in and give it a little bit of, usually 50. Occasionally on the outside kick, I'll go a little bit lower, but let's hear what this one sounds like. It doesn't always take a whole lot. I'm usually trying to find something in the mids to suck out. Well, the 400 can sometimes sound good on a kick, but 400, 200. And then usually a little 2.5, and this is that DW Performance Series kick that I have. It's the house kit currently. And it usually sounds good with some 2.5. That's the frequency that Warren calls the Dave Jordan frequency. You know, Alice in Chains and all that. That's and plenty of other records, of course. But that kind of boost at 2.5 sounds a little basketball-y if you go too much, but a little more so right now than most days with that kick. Actually, it sounds a little more basketball-y, but I'll just go with that for now. And I do have one of the SSL 611s patched in case I want a little bit of the kind of point, you know, the 5K kind of thing. We'll see if that sounds good here or not. So and 5K, of course, is the octave of 2.5, so this all kind of makes sense. That's going to be a little slappier. And this is a kind of cool thing too. So they have the black and the brown circuits in there over the years. SSL has a bunch of different EQ circuits that are all kind of named after the colors of the knobs. So this is black and this is brown. There's definitely a difference. least here in the room. I'm hearing a little bit more low out of that brown, although I usually end up with the black on the drums. I'm going brown, but it was close this time. I will usually tap this a little bit with this 165 from DBX, so a vintage 165. The thing is, when you see the meter moving, or not even the meter, when you see those lights lighting up at all, it's working, and it's working possibly harder than you want it to be. So I have it set up post fader here. What kind of gain do I have going on? I like to not pad the API pre's. They just sound so cool when they're saturating, which sometimes leads to some interesting gain staging, because I have the threshold all the way up on that guy down there. And then this peak stop, which usually sounds terrible. So, all right, so we're going to pad this and see what it... All right, let's bring the threshold down a little bit. You can kind of hear it work there when you're leaning into it that hard. He'll probably end up playing a little harder when he actually starts playing. Many drummers will. But for right now, we're just going to be tapping it a little tiny bit. That just kind of controls it. We'll move on to our kick out. It's that kind of thing right there. I think it's just the snare buzzing that I hear, but there's something going on there. Let's see what we got here. So yeah, that's 50 hertz on that guy. 40. Turn the sub off, you know? It's always kind of tempting to leave it on and make the drums sound big and huge, but you got to hear what they sound like without the sub in the room. An API is so interesting, just so cool, because it's just in these 2 dB steps. So you either turn it on or you don't. You don't obsess over the 0.1, 0.2 dB increments. I think it was the Warren talks about the Ken Calais. Just, you know, they're there to use them, and just turn them, and oops, it won't go any further. You're giving it 12 dB of whatever, you know. So we'll try to find something in the middle to take out a little bit, I think, like that. .5, 5. Yeah, that's cool. And then those two things together. Actually, yeah, okay. It feels like I'm losing a little bit of low end with those, so I might go move that mic just a tiny bit, because they're about the same distance off the front head and the resonant head, the batter and the reso head, each of the mics, and it really should line up pretty well, but it feels like might be losing just a little bit of low end, so I'm going to walk out there and move the mics. All right, so I have usually have the inside mic about, I don't know, it varies, but the same distance effectively off the front batter head as this one is off the reso head, and it seems to me like we're probably a little closer on the outside than I normally am. So we'll back that up a little bit, and then I'm hoping to get both these microphones that are sounding good on their own to just feel a little bit better together, you know? And then, you know, you'll sometimes have people build tents over this. I have a couple little kids' chairs and a blanket that we'll put over it sometimes to try to keep some of the cymbals out and stuff like that, but it's not going to be an issue with what we're doing here today. So just move that off a little bit, and then we'll see if that kind of gets us in the zone as far as those two mics getting along. Yeah, so we got more low end there. Like that. And then we'll just hear how the kick sounds now that I've moved the outside kick. All right, Brown was just talking about probably hitting a little bit harder, so we'll see where he's at with the inside kick. And that's probably the biggest challenge, in my opinion, is once you get everything lined up, just making sure that as things change that you're keeping up with it. All right, so in the interest of time, let's move on to the snare and hear how that sounds. So this is the Beyer Dynamic M201, which I love. So that's cool, and I would take it like that. I mean, but I like the openness of it and everything, but I think we do need to try to control the ring a little bit. So this might actually be a good time to try out some of the dampening stuff. I mean, start with the least amount of, maybe not just moon gel damping, but maybe like that Remo. Yeah, toss some moon gel in it. Let's hear what it sounds like. Starting to sound like a Superphonic. Keep playing. I'm just going to mess with the EQ a little bit, okay? So that's the kind of low end. You can get out of 100 or 200 on a API EQ on a Ludwig. Find something in the middle to take out. That's 600. That's 400, which I think needs to go. It's just a question of how much. And we're gonna do that, and then as far as the top end. So that's, of course, the off-axis kind of cymbal stuff that we have to deal with on a snare. That's really not all that bad. And of course, gating, and I'll usually take a sample of whatever snare we're recording and layer it underneath there, and that's a good way, of course, to bring the noise floor down of everything else that's going on around the actual snare. Place those carefully. The actual drum we recorded, sometimes others, but so it might be a little choked, but I like where we're getting now. We moved the microphone. We're messing with actually like really minimal dampening. I was thinking it was going to take more than that. You got one moon gel on there, and it's getting in the ballpark. So now I'm going to take a listen to the snare bottom and see if that gives us what we're after as far as the rattle, because I feel like I want a little bit more of that back now. Reversed phase. That's kind of an interesting thing. So we moved the top snare in closer to the head, and we didn't move the bottom snare in closer. And it's kind of split phase between the two. It actually sounds a little bit better with the polarity the same, which is actually reverse of the microphone on the top of the snare. But I think what we want to do is move it in towards the bottom of the snare to maybe get a little less of the We're supposed to hear the snares, but a little less of the brittleness of the snares on the bottom, and maybe even a little bit of body out of the bottom of the snare. So we'll go move that a little bit, and I think we're going to be in the ballpark. All right, so we're going to bring the bottom snare mic in a little bit closer. We were a little further off because where I had the initial placement of the mic, of the top mic, and now we're going to move this one in a little tighter and see if we can get it to be more in phase, since it was kind of working in the same polarity and kind of working in reverse polarity with the top mic when we just listened to it. So hopefully we're getting there. All right, so let's hear that snare again, please. Without polarity reversed. Get a little bit of body out of this. We'll see if we can get it or not. Just seems if you turn up a bottom snare mic by itself, it's sometimes just adding brittleness, and if we can get some of that gone, that's a good thing. Or rather just kind of balance it more. Yeah, a little 200 on that. Took out some 400 and gave it a little top at 7. Then we'll blend that back in with the snare top. We'll listen to the overheads. Let's hear a kick snare hat for now, please. Kick snare hat for now. With open and close, please. So I try not to do a ton to the overheads on the way in, just making sure the placement's good and they sound good. But and I like a lot of the chick, the kind of middle, the chunk out of hi-hats, but it's a little too much there. So I'm bringing up, I'm going to move it around a little bit, but I'm on 1.5K right now, and then a couple dB boost at about 7, which is also what I had on the snare, I think. I think the overheads end up getting affected quite a bit when you, in post in some cases, in mix, but I want a little bit on there from this. Still have some body to the hats there in the overheads, but have them kind of floating a little bit more, because it's easy to describe sound. And now we bring up the kick and the snare and we see if everything's phase coherent or not. So inverting the polarity on the overheads definitely does it for the snare for me. More body there. Not sure that the kick is totally in or out with that, but we also can take some bottom end off the kick. Let me hear that a little bit more. I'm going to bring up the hat mic and see what we're working with. Okay. Which the hat mic might not even be necessary, but just a little touch of it, I think. Pad that a little bit, I think. Or actually, maybe just do it that way. Turn the pre all the way down. The saturation on these pre's sounds so good with, especially a snare drum, but not really the hat, always. So these tab EQs from Purple are like inductor versions of 560s from API. I love them. In this case, I'm just taking off some bottom end that we definitely won't need on the hat track, of course, and then seeing if there's anything worth bringing out at these chosen frequencies for the hat. Brent hits a little heavy on the hats, so we're gonna get that in both of these mics right now, but I think for what we're doing, it's totally fine. Go ahead and keep playing. I'm gonna move on to the room mics and start hearing how those sound. So this next one will be the mono room mic that's out in the middle of the room there. That one's coming through one of the Neve pre's over here, the BAE Neve pre's, which are kind of my ones I use for the crunchy room mic. Of course, it's always become a challenge with the cymbals and everything. Let's just hear a kick, snare, hat, please. All right, so this is the mono room mic. This is the one that's down in between all the gobos and everything, so I just try to get a bunch of stuff to bounce around in there, and I see how it sounds, and then I put it through this retro 176, which is just amazing, and we'll play with that a little bit. But this mic sounds pretty good right now. It seems to be phase coherent enough, and we'll mess with that a little bit too. And what we're looking for out of this is something to fill in the space between the close mics, and it should sound pretty cool. Listen to that with the kick and snare and overheads. Take that out and some of the mojo goes away. So these are the AEAs, the ribbons that we're capturing the room with, the stereo room behind the big tall gobos. And I have these, I actually had to move one from this 1023, so we have the 1073 and the 1023 that are on relatively matched settings there. That band's off. And I think I took a tiny bit out of there around 360. We have that on each of those, just in different spots. And then a little bit of 10, I think the 1073s are at 10, not 12. But just a little bit of top there. I don't usually find myself reaching for on room mics, but I think it works here. I mean, like a lot of top end. So we'll listen to this corner microphone that I have, and we've talked about that before. That's that little Niant microphone previously. Little guy in the Canon connector from XLR. Toss it in the corner, crush the heck out of it. It's just hanging off that rack of snares back there. So this one right now is picking up a lot of the hat. I'm gonna go put some foam in front of that just to block some of the direct hat, I think. But otherwise, it sounds really good just out of the gate. Then we'll see what's going on with compression and everything. All right, so we got a couple pieces of foam that are hanging around. I'm just going to try to block some of the direct sound from the hi-hat, really. That mic's just hanging down there and works. There's a bunch of low end that propagates in the corner and everything, and usually sounds pretty good, but I want to control the hat a little bit. Brent hits them reasonably hard, which sounds great, but for the stuff we're going to compress, and I don't necessarily even need the one in the front, but just going to try to block some of the direct sound, because what we really want is the crunchy kind of stuff to make the drums sound fun. Look at that kick hat snare. I want to hear what the corner mic sounds like now. So that might be controlling the hat a little bit, and then we'll compress it over here. You want to attack that one pretty hard. Let's hear how that's working with the kick and snare. All right, so I think that one's also a little bit slightly out with the kick, but works either direction, but it's really reinforcing the snare. Keep playing that. We're going to listen to the mystery corner mic and see if that does anything for us or not. Oh yeah, get some compression on already. Not an amazing sounding position for that mic, but let's see what we're working with here. I'm gonna take a little top end and a little bottom end off that. Don't think any low end boost is necessary. We're gonna tunnel low end out of that corner. So I think with a little more time, I'd probably move that around a little bit and see if we get the mic just sounding better, but I think it may give us a little of what we're looking for, maybe. And it might be flamming a little too much with the hi-hat in this room, but it might be usable at a lower level. All right, so I think we successfully recorded some okay drums there. Let's mess with damping a little bit. So if we take that same snare and we take off the moon gel, put on the ream O, just kind of keep moving up through the different options. So we ended up with, I think, our kind of baseline ultimately was just moon gel. I mean, honestly, I was surprised at how well it controlled.
Yeah, I mean,
everything.
for being just a moon gel, like it's wild how different it sounds in here versus how it sounded in there. Like the amount of like control, the way that it cleaned everything up was Like it surprised even me.
Yeah, I thought we were going to have to put more on it to get that sound, to get where we wanted to end up. And sometimes you find yourself piling all kinds of moon gels on there, and you're just like, yep, here's one. Placed perfectly.
Yeah.
That moon gel full of stick sawdust.
Yeah. So, I mean, your basic little drum gel, it's sticky, it's gooey, it'll get a little bit oily, it'll collect stick dust.
And they are washable.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, you can get them wet and they'll get sticky again. You can throw them at the window. They're like those old sticky hands.
People use sticky hands for...
Yeah, I've seen it happen, yeah.
I've seen it too.
It's a good substitute.
I think we have some more similar beat to what you played for the rest of the stuff, but we lost our bottom snare for a minute. It sounds good, and a lot of that, I mean, this is our...
I mean, that's a 5-inch metal snare drum, and it sounds crazy fat. Like, that's awesome.
And that's our soloed snare drum, but when you put the rooms in, the rooms and the overheads, and that's where we're getting some of our length out of the snare. And mess around with those all we want. All right. And so then we move to just the Remo, so just the piece of drum head, basically.
Remo, I think Remo, Marcus them is just Remo.
Remo.
Yeah, it's just a piece of mylar drum head, a thicker, I mean, this is thicker than anything that they really make, a head out of, so this is probably 15 mil plus or something. I'm somebody will correct me in some comment section, I'm sure.
And they always have a piece of the packaging stuck to them.
Exactly, yeah.
Forever.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
It just adds to the mojo. It adds the perfect amount of cardboard damping. But yeah, so I mean, this is essentially just a piece of really thick drum head that goes around the edge and minimizes some of those kind of more harsh overtones, and also brings the pitch of the drum down just a hair.
So it sounds still controlled, but that little that kind of ring that we're trying to control, that the one moon gel tackled, that's back, right? So
Yeah.
We got versus.
And it's crazy too, like the way that affects the pitch, right? Like adding mass to the head instantly drops. If you play the one that you just had called up, and then play the Remo, like it brings it down like a semitone plus.
A little bit, yeah. But yeah, and then that kind of woof is back, right? So we went back to so that was the first was moon gel, then we did Remos, and then we said, okay, let's put the moon gel back on there to control that. I don't want to make the sound again. That sound. And then to also control it a little bit with the with the Remo. And that one sounds great to me.
Yeah.
It's so you still hear it, but it just brings it down in volume so much. And the funny thing is that, like, we obsess over a lot of these little things that would end up getting swallowed up in the mix anyway. But I mean, you'd be able to do whatever you want with that snare and not have to worry about it coming out. And then it's changing the perception of the attack of it a bit, I think, too.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the thing that's cool about this is like all of these sounds have a context. Like, I mean, that last one you played would sound great on like a funk track or something like that, where you need to be super dry and articulate. If you got a way better drummer than me, like Nate Smith on there or something like that, he'd probably sound super, super awesome playing a drum like that. But like every single one of these has its place. There wasn't a single sound that, at least that I've heard so far, that has been like I could do without that type of thing. From there, we get into the big fat snare drum stuff. And
So big fat snare drum. So that's going to be similar kind of stuff. Toppers for the snare with various size holes in them, and then that material around the edge to make it even heavier, even more damping. So this one is the Donut XL, if you want to pull that one up. And then going back to the Remo Moon Gel. So it totally kills that womp womp when you go to the Donut XL. Great snare sound.
Yeah. Dries it out, adds some mass, but it adds enough surface with the head and doesn't clamp it down so much that it's really taking over the drum. It still sounds like it did before, just a lot drier.
So the Steve's Donut, so we're gonna get even drier, right? Because we're going to the smaller circle.
Yeah,
that's
more
this.
coverage, more mass. Apparently so, yeah. More mass, it's just harder to move.
Lowers the pitch and the tempo.
Yeah.
So comparing that to the Donut XL. All right, and then the big fat snare drum, the namesake of their company, is solid, right?
Yeah, and this came from something that I saw a lot of drummers do, where they would basically take an old head, an old 14-inch head, and just cut out kind of the top portion, like take away the collar, just cut the whole head out, and throw that down on top of a snare drum, and it had this really cool effect where it would just drop the pitch, dry it up, and turn it into this big ballad 80s snare. And so this company just kind of developed an even cooler, more durable version of that you can just lay on top, and it makes your snare drum sound like this.
So that's really cool. I really like a big, fat, dry snare drum. That might
say the thing.
I just like the big fat snare drum, and I like it to be dry. But I think I personally settle more in like this kind of zone. And actually, let's play it without the. So still, pretty significant difference there in just how alive it is. And then this is the Steve's Donut again, which is the middle size. I personally think I land somewhere in that territory. What do you think?
Oh yeah, these are my two favorites of the lineup. I like the fact that they give me, and especially just like, this isn't something that you can necessarily hear on the mics, but like playing the instrument, like as the drummer. Yeah, well, and it's not even the feedback, it's the rebound that you get from the head itself. Sometimes throwing something like this on there can stop the stick in a weird way, and it just doesn't bounce the way that it should, and can feel really, it doesn't feel like the same instrument. And so for me, having some purchase to actually like get my stick in the center of the drum and get the same response that I would, but have it sound completely different is super cool. And yeah, I personally favor both of these. In fact, the session that we did a few weeks ago, this was on that pearl snare that we used for 60% of the tracks, and then that big pillowy acrylite had this on here. So
I knew we got some use out of those.
Yeah, we got some really good mileage out of them. And then we get into some weird territory.
It's a quesadilla. They have this called the quesadilla. It's a couple layers of fabric.
Yeah,
it's just one layer of fabric. Then some sort of, it's got a magnet on it, so it'll stick to a hoop. But,
which is so smart, because this is like born out of the trick of using like old tea towels or bandanas on the drum, like putting a piece of cloth in between, and so this is just, it's really drying everything out.
And they're really cool on toms.
Yeah.
It'd actually be great to hear them on toms, but it's just that sound, and that should be. The funny thing is, I own all these and we use them and everything like that, but I would have guessed that would have been drier than some of the other ones, and it's not.
Yeah, it wasn't that big of a difference compared to, say, the original big fat snare drum. I mean, this
is the kind of thing where we don't really like document it when we're going like, oh, I don't know, put something else on there, just swap it out, tune the snare, tune it up, tune it down, put a moon gel on there, do something to it. We're trying to figure something out in the heat of battle in a session, and you don't really document it and say, oh yeah, that's.
Yeah, well, and that's the interesting thing too about drums, is that on a different drum or a different shell depth or a different tuning or with a different batter side head, I mean, these can all have very different results. I mean, that small difference that we're detecting could be a really big difference on a different drum. So, you know, it's it just goes to show what a little experimentation can get you with the.
Well, this is fun. It was good to get to toss these things on here and hear what the differences are. So so one of the snare weights, right? So this is the.
Yeah. So the first one we tried was the M80, which is really cool. It just clips on the drum, and we just had it in its natural state. It does have a little magnet where you can fold these little doodads up and get varying degrees of damping, but we just had it with arms wide open.
That's interesting because I'd have to hear it in a track, but it's kind of almost gating. So those pop up and flip back down. So they're basically gating the snare a little bit.
Yeah, where something like a moon gel, you know, it'll add like this thing. It's like it sticks to the drum, right? I mean, it's you know, it's not going anywhere. It doesn't really release off of the drum, so it's adding that mass, and that mass stays there. So it's kind of clamping down. It also causes some weird tuning funkiness sometimes. Whereas this is like it's opening up. You're hearing the attack of the drum. You're hearing the first, you know, however many milliseconds of the drum while it's still up in the air, and then it clamps back down and helps control the decay. But I like these. I mean, they don't leave any gunk on your drum. They don't gather pet hair or stick dust and stuff like that.
They're really cool. Then you can change with the single thing, you know, the single dampener. You can change its character a little bit by putting probably one or both of those up, right?
Or even just flip the whole thing up and it'll hold up. I like these a lot. I use them on toms live all the time.
I could hear that really working in certain tracks, but like isolated, it's the gating kind of thing, not gated reverb, but you know. So the next one is the brass snare weight, right?
And it's it's a big hunk of brass, and it's actually pretty ingenious. It just adds a lot of weight. I mean, feel this thing. It's like a big old hunk of metal, and it just sits on the drum, and it has a little leather insert, but it's kind of an elevated version of this concept, right? Where you're getting that gating effect, where it's controlling, but it's also, because of the extra weight, it is adding
back down more.
Yeah, ton of mass, so you're getting a lower note, and it really does have a pretty prominent gated effect, but it doesn't take over the snare drum like some of these, like the Remo or the Big Fat Snare Drum do. So it leaves it intact. So if you've got a snare that you kind of enjoy the ring of, I use this on my bell brass snare all the time, where it's already pretty dry and controlled as it is, but I just need to take off that like little bit of zing. Yeah. And this does a great job of it.
So there's just some tracks where you can't really, you don't really hear it because it's part of the track, but where you can't imagine that ring being not there.
Yeah.
You know, some iconic tracks. And so it's controlling. The funny thing is the resonance is still there. It's just not as noticeable. I think it changes the relationship of the attack to that ring.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, because this is still, again, compared to these others, it's you know, opening up a little bit to let the character of the drum go through, but controlling the ring in a nice way. And I mean, to segue into our next example, it pops out, they love magnets at Snareweight apparently, and so they have these little, they call them the 70s inserts that you know, clip in here and provide even more damping. And those, I mean, if you watch the snare as it has them on there, these things are flying up and plopping back down. But gives you a little bit more control, a lot more of that dry 70s kind of Steve Gadd-ish snare drum sound.
That's the brass snare weight with leather insert. This is the one we just talked about.
Oh, nice.
Just because we put the acrylite back up there that we were talking about, that we were experimenting with in the last tracking session. Acrylite with the XL donut, right?
Yes, that's the acrylite with a controlled sound head, XL donut on the top, and a about 3-inch square of Viva brand paper towel underneath there.
Oh, that's a secret,
You
the
think,
brand.
yeah, I was gonna say, you think if I threw some like brawny underneath there, it'd have like a nice burly tone or something?
That'd sound different. Yeah. So we messed around with it with the miking. I guess you could probably hear what was going on with it a little bit, but this is
I'm excited to hear this because I could hear it a little bit in the Q mix, but like, you know, I was still through the Sonys, I was still hearing like the drum itself in front of me. So I'm curious to hear how this turned out.
so the first one we did, I think, was where we pointed it almost down the shell, almost parallel with the shell.
This was the, oh yeah, that's right. This was over the top of the hoop, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, like totally exaggerating what somebody would do if they mic it, and it was like way better than I expected.
It's almost disappointing, right? Like,
Like it should sound way worse.
yeah,
It
sounds like a,
it sounds thin, but it sounds like there's a little crack there.
it just sounds like a normal snare drum. It's a little, it's a little thin, little
This one though,
anemic, but
this is the snare kind of, or the mic kind of in normal placement, and then just shifted over the top of the snare straight down.
oh, this was the extreme angle. That's right, yeah, because we kept that same angle over the hoop, but we moved it
Yeah.
dead center on the drum.
Because why not?
That sounds good.
Maybe a little low end build up that I should have taken out with the EQ, what we had done. But yeah, sounds good.
But I mean, it's easier to take that out or something like that compared
totally.
to, I mean, you can't really add it back into the one over the edge.
And the I mean, this is just the solid snare. Yeah, so that one sounds good. I would use one of those for the sample, probably.
Yeah, if you erase the part about having to hit it with sticks and move around the kit, it's great mic technique.
And this is parallel with the top head, which sounds pretty much how you'd expect it to sound. Which I mean,
I'm eating
honestly,
my words now.
that sounds more like I would expect to have it sound pointed at the shell, but
Yeah.
that one's actually okay. That first one, but not great. Mic on the snare shell. This is a couple inches away. I said 2 inches. I think it was a little further off.
Yeah, that was.
That doesn't sound useful by itself at all.
No, but I can see that being a good compliment. I mean, you like to use the knee mic,
Mhm.
and that I feel like is sort of a beefed up, better version of that. But that in isolation could be really cool too. Not in isolation. Added.
That's part of the overall sound. And this is moving closer. Did you get it? How close did you get it?
So I mean, it started off. We were probably that far off the shell, and then when we moved it close to try and take advantage of some of that proximity effect, we got it probably within 3/4 of an inch, maybe a half inch away.
All right. And still not amazing, but that I could hear. I think being part of a snare, like with a top mic.
Yeah, that's cool. You layer that with the top and a bottom mic. I mean, that's picking up enough snare response to really. I mean, that could be a substitute for a bottom mic on the right drum.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it could. But yeah, so let's say bottom mic with maybe a little bit more body to it. What do we have? Let's see. This was the snare bottom by itself. So that versus.
That's cool. That's almost like it has a lot less like low end information, stuff that could.
Yeah, it's actually cool, and it sounds like maybe not. I mean, it sounds like it's really being caught by the compressor, but I don't know if it is. I mean, it's just this distortion kind of stuff, and it's probably the distortion from the snares.
So here's my question. So one thing I'm really curious about, and this is maybe where I probably should have paid more attention in physics class, but Like when it comes to a top
I'm not a
mic
physics
and a
teacher.
bottom mic. Well, yeah. So maybe we can just be curious together here. But I mean, when it comes to a top mic and a bottom mic, right? A drum is a column of air, right? And it's playing ping pong, right? It's when I hit the top of the drum, it's pushing that column of air down to the bottom head, and that's getting pushed back. So it's easy to see that they're 180 degrees out of phase, right? You put a top mic on, you put a bottom mic on, you got to flip the phase because when one's pushing, the other's pulling, and that's doing the same thing to the mic. When you put a mic sideways on the shell, like that shell is vibrating as well. Like it's taking some of that pressure that column of air is moving. It's not, a one-to-one. So is that pushing out, or is it vibrating along its axis? Like how does that affect the phase relationship?
I guess it should be. So sound doesn't really travel in like waves, right? It's compression and rarefaction. So it's everything going like this, So of course, the top should be sucking away from the microphone while the bottom is pushing towards the other microphone. On the outside of the shell, I would expect that it's pushing against it. I mean, and frankly, we can just look at it and tell because so it's pushing. So I mean, if we were to use that as part of a snare sound, we'd end up inverting that polarity. Maybe that's what I'll do. Maybe I'll take that and layer it in with one of the other samples and just see what it adds.
Yeah.
Because then, it's pushing while the snare bottom pulls, and this is also what the snare top will look like because it's sucking away from the microphones. So I can totally take that and drop it into one of the samples that we make and just see how it sounds.
Do we have a second to hear? I'm so curious how the shotgun mic sounded.
But that kind of thing, like we were talking about when you were in there, it could be the mono overhead kind of thing.
Yeah.
If you get it pointed positioned just right, it will reject a lot of the cymbals and could be usable. But I don't know. I'd never put a shotgun microphone kind of on a snare before. So,
Well, now you can't say that anymore.
nope. But yeah, thanks so much for coming and doing this.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, definitely appreciate it.
It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks. Anytime.
Appreciate it.